And we're live. Hey, welcome everybody. Ask a Philosopher Friday night. Yes. And I got here a philosopher. Oh, I'm pointing to the wrong side. Here we go. You know, one of these days I'll get the directions right. I'm always confused by this. That way. Hi, Nick.
Hey, how's it going, Steve?
You're the actual philosopher. I'm just here with a guy with a bunch of books that aren't really even real, but whatever.
Yeah, well, they're real, but there ain't a whole heck of a lot of them.
Yeah, no, I used to, dude. I tell you, I used to have a nice little library. Between me and my sister, we would get these really cheap books that we would order, boxes of them at a time. They were like $1 for a textbook, and so one of the reasons I actually do know a little bit about a lot of things is I had a lot of books growing up. I lived with my sister after I got in the Navy. She had my books, I had her books, and we had this nice little library office, and kind of like what you have, only more interesting books probably, but. I like to read. I used to love to read a lot.
Yeah, you know what? I used to really like the idea of just getting the really nice. But my father was a criminal defense attorney, so he always had he had for real the law books. You'd go into his office and they were all there. And I like the idea of duplicating that. And then I realized you're paying a lot of money for just the same goddamn books.
Well,
so,
and it also sucks if you move. Moving books is difficult. They're heavy, and I moved around a lot, so I've lost a lot of the. Well, actually, I lost probably 95% of my books. That magic number always pops up, doesn't
it? It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous.
Absolutely everywhere. And I'm sure at some point we'll figure out 95% of the reason why. Yeah, my wife got me a Kindle just for that reason. But the thing is, I don't like not being able to thumb it. I don't like not being, and they're the Paperwhite's the closest thing to, I use the Paperwhite, and that's as close to, I'll use that. I don't know. And I'm also dyslexic. So quite frankly, I've never connected with reading as much as I would like to. So
see, I just, like, for example, like earlier today, somebody had mentioned on Facebook a Stephen King short story that called The Jaunt, and I happen to have read that short story, right? So I was like, hey, I've read this. I know what it's about. I like that. I like in fact, I read a ton of books. I was always that kid that read like 100 books in the book reading club, but now not so much because it's all PDFs. And what I do is I kind of piecemeal books, right? I don't really read from start to finish. What I'll do is I'll read like a chapter, I'll read like a couple pages, especially the philosophy stuff, because I don't really digest it as fast as I used to digest stuff. So I have to ponder things, and what I'll do is I'll read something a few times, and then I'll just take a break from it. I just think about it, just mull it over my head, maybe sleep, maybe rest. There's been times where I had no idea what the hell they were talking about, but just simply working at it, rereading it a few times over a period, even sometimes days, I was like, I have that light bulb moment and go, oh, now I get it. And then next day I totally forget about it. But it doesn't last long, right? You have that moment of enlightenment, right? That eureka moment, and then all of a sudden you're like, I just don't remember. Yeah, that epiphany is gone. So, anyways.
I've always been terrible at sort of independent research in that respect. I hate to read. But if it's engagement with another person, I'm a sponge. I can learn like that, and I just with all the senses fire. I learn. I memorize. But I would much rather. It's not about time. I'd much rather spend 3 times as much time engaged with somebody else. In dialogue and just active engagement than half as much time reading. I am dyslexic as fuck. I am.
Oh,
really
I learn more in conversation. Oh, absolutely. When it comes to these kind of topics, I learn more by talking to somebody who really kind of knows what they're talking about. Now, you do on many of the subjects, and then people that are more and more versed in the other specific subjects, we have them on. Like tonight, we were going to have Ozzy on. But I messed up. I didn't solidify the day with him, and he was going on vacation. Now, he knows I do these on Fridays, so I just kind of in my head figured that he was going to be available for this Friday. But, oh well, maybe next Friday. We're going to be doing ichtheism and theological cognitivism with Ozzy, because I got to ask him a few questions and kind of go over the way I'm looking at it, as opposed to like how Graham Oppy looks at it and Michael Martin look at it. I think it was Michael Martin. It was Graham Oppy and maybe it was Air. I think it was Mary's error that, but anyways, I know Oppie thinks a very specific way about it, and I understand his argument, and I think it's good, but I look at it a little bit differently, and this is philosophy where you're allowed to do that, right? So
yep. Well, but I'm absolutely, that is nowhere near my wheelhouse. So I'm just like, I am not going anywhere near that with Ozzy here. And I've just recently, I've actually started getting into sort of um, uh, what is it? My brain just sort of where an argument is not, oh my God, incoherent, getting down to incoherent arguments for God, but that's not usually where I land on. But I was doing a breakdown of the um, logical problem of evil, which we discussed before,
We've
and
done that one.
somebody kept complaining that
Done twice
uh,
actually.
yeah, somebody kept complaining that, well, what you're if we were to take it the way that you're framing it, that would lead to an incoherent model of God. I was like, yeah, that's why it's a problem.
See, I looked at that a little bit differently than you, and I do understand exactly what you're saying. I don't think it's so much of an incoherency issue as an inconsistent issue, because given if all the omni properties are there for the for an omnibenevolent, omnipresent, and omniscient, and omnipotent God, and their evil does exist. To me, I don't think all those propositions can be true at the same time, thus being a logically inconsistent system, not necessarily incoherent. And there's a distinction to be made there. But I do get your point that God is self-refuting if that's the things that they posit in either case.
Yes,
Okay.
and which is where I
I
stick
do
them.
agree
And
with
then
that. Yeah.
yeah, and then when they say, well, that's not, I don't think that that's what God is. It's like, okay, then that's not the argument for you. That's, I wouldn't use that
Yeah, a lot of people
argument.
don't use that argument any longer, though. I mean, there are ways of defeating certain things, and the logical problem even only really exists to like a really specific type of God, like Amsom's God. But the evidential one, I happen to think, is much better argument. It's more wide, right? It's more generalized. It's not as targeted, but it has, I think, more utility because it can be used more for more types of deities. So, but anyways, we got questions tonight already, man. Do you believe that?
We do. We
Yeah, holy
do.
cap. Oh, holy cap. Holy crap. I'm
So,
sorry.
well, no,
I'm really,
I've got,
go ahead.
well, no, I've gotten Cygart's been asking me about my writing because, of course, I'm a writer, but I'm extraordinarily dyslexic. And that's, first of all, that's actually one reason why I always have an extraordinarily high quality set of headphones, and have always had. It's one of the things I just have to splurge on. Always have cutting edge voice dictation software, and it's that always gets a huge portion of the CPU. I just say maximum accuracy, max out the CPU to that, and just voice dictation. I obviously can and do have to write. And when I do without it, it's a royal pain in the neck, and it takes me 4 or 5 times longer because I really have to check everything. But it makes if I don't care about it, if I know it's just a draft for myself, then I just don't care, and I write like however I want. It doesn't bother anyone. If in the end, when I'm doing a final edit and getting it ready for publication, it just takes forever.
I don't
It
use the voice
sucks.
software. I have voice software, and I'm not proficient at it, but I rather type. And what I do is I'll type something and I'll do a really rough draft, and then I'll go through and make the necessary corrections. Because when I type something like a blog, I usually doing it at a little coffee shop that I usually hang out with. So I'm doing something outside of the house. I don't really write much in the house when I do my blogs. I don't know. I feel more creative when I'm outside, kind of just not at home, right? But anyways, you want to get some of these questions? We haven't got a super chat
Yeah.
already.
Oh, wow. Okay, I didn't see any of that come in. Sounds good.
Well, I'm glad we just got one super chat because this video was already demonetized before we even started. I'm like,
They
really?
just knew I was coming onto your channel, and oh, you got Nick. Boom, no money.
I'm like, what the hell is philosophy? Come on, YouTube. If this is something that's demonetizable, something's seriously wrong in your algorithm, okay? And by the way, yes, I think my hair came out very well today. Thank you. No, which nobody said.
Cocoa butter.
Well, it was actually, you know what? It's actually technically I told you it was cocoa butter, but really it's actually mango butter. I have coconut other stuff, but it was mango butter. But whatever, details,
Okay,
right?
okay.
It
Yeah.
smells fabulous though.
It's okay.
Yeah, want to sniff it?
Perfect.
You want to smell it? It's no.
All right, hold on.
Yeah, here, wait.
Oh, Google has updated the smell-o-vision there.
Yeah,
man.
it's great. Good stuff, right?
That's good stuff. Exactly.
All right, so let's see if I can read this because again, contacts. Yeah, I know I look totally different. Chris Foster, $5. First question of the night. What is a question? Ooh, deep and profound.
God.
Now remember, we attempt to give deep and profound answers, sort of. Don't expect greatness.
It's an interrogative designed to probe knowledge.
That's
and I
good.
know that.
Good.
Yeah, that's I'm quoting. That's actually a quote from Airplane, the movie Airplane, and So I figure if I am, that's my answer.
No,
That's where I.
I can't top that. So it's just an honor interrogatory. Yeah, I guess it's an interrogatory to try to elucidate on something, to obtain answers to something. I mean, Ozzy might have some deeply profound 5-hour long answer to that, but I'm going with that one.
Ozzy would destroy all of us. Oh, there is another question. What is life? And that does get to, that's interesting because I don't think life is anything special in any sense that we think of it as. And I am a determinist, and we were talking about that too, which isn't what is life, but that does get to either what is consciousness or what is free will. So if we want to dive into that in any meaningful way, I'm happy to do that. And there's what is consciousness. So yeah, what is life and what is consciousness?
Sarah Michelle just had a video on the problem of hard consciousness. Now, I haven't watched it yet. I watched your other video on Blair White, but I haven't watched the problem of hard consciousness yet. I plan to. Trust me. Sorry, Sarah, but I haven't got to it yet. But life, the thing with life is life has different criteria of what considered to be life depending on what field and domain of discourse that you're in. A virologist versus a bacteriologist is going to have two different things of what they might consider to be life as compared to like an artificial intelligence person. So to me, I just go over the very simplistic things of what constitutes life. If it has the ability to reproduce, excrement, respiration, things of that nature. Now, again, I don't even think it has to have all of them, but some component of them. And it's kind of like what the Supreme Court said about pornography. You kind of know it when you see it, if it's life. But to me, is more interesting is that fine balance between non-life and life. Where is that line of demarcation? That's the question that I think is very difficult to answer.
I try to make the argument in one of my intro classes that fire is alive, based on the criteria that you just gave. I don't think it's alive, but I think it actually meets most of those criteria. In a philosophical sense, I don't think life is very much. I think that's a great biological definition. I think we have to have a biological definition. I think that serves a tremendously important definition. But I think in a philosophical sense, I don't think we're anything more than complex machines. And it may seem like, well, gee, how does a machine sort of self-function and self-operate? Well, the same way any sort of chemical energy is always constantly being moved from one area in the universe to another area. I mean, the entire universe is an operating machine on one way or another. And I think human beings really aren't anything else than the chemicals that we're comprised of. So if you talk about life in a biological sense, yes, I think there's a definition where you can say that enough chemicals have gotten together and can create a system that is self-sustaining and it has these features, and we call that alive. But I don't think that there's a consciousness, a soul, anything above and beyond that. It's a sort of an emergent property of the universe that we have things that are called life, which is nothing more than complex chemical processes. Organisms made up of these processes. But that's me. That's because I feel like depressing people today. So if you are having a good day and you're just like, wow, things are things are looking up, and you want to get depressed, come to Ask a Philosopher today, where Nick just shits over the idea of consciousness, life, and anything being special. What can I say?
I'm gonna toss Sygard an invite here. I think I found him on.
Perfect.
I think I found him on Skype. If not, I'm gonna be adding a random stranger here. But if this is you, Cy, let me know. But if not, message me on DM and I will get you in here. But let's try that first. But yeah, look, I think that I'm not a materialist. You're a materialist, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't subscribe to materialism. If anything, I might kind of dive into source physicalism is called, but for the most part, I don't really subscribe to a materialistic framework because I don't think that I can support it and justify it. However, I mean, it makes sense in some cases, but the fact that you have some emergent thing like consciousness, something that is not intrinsic to what matter is and what forces are, because if everything just seems to reduce down to forces and matter, it doesn't really explain the problem of hard consciousness. It doesn't explain, well, we have qualia, well, I think Dennett against that, but it doesn't explain why we have sensory perceptions. It doesn't explain cognitive functions. It doesn't explain a lot of things about our reasoning. Somebody had asked in the live chat, can you go over theological argument from logic for laymen? It doesn't explain theological arguments either that much. I mean, theological arguments kind of explain theological instead of having theological. I don't know how the logic fits in, but like a theological argument would be something along the lines of things that look created, things that look like they're designed, is not because of a designer as far as an intelligent designer, but a designer that is non-intelligent but has the ability to do certain things like select, which would be like natural selection. So Darwin suggested that natural selection and adaptation and mutations and all these other things. Well, I don't even, he didn't deal with mutations. He didn't call them mutations because he was in a particular, he thought it was like particulate, right? I'll side this question in a second here, but he realized that there was something called teleological design or teleonomic design, where things could appear to be designed, but it's because of nature and not some kind of deity, which was the common thing back then, right? That's what everybody kind of believed. Sai, is that you making all that noise? I think so. Sai.
I heard his mic.
Hey,
Hey,
can you hear me?
Yeah, buddy.
Right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, can you see?
Okay.
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yes,
Awesome, buddy. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well.
I was just turning over a question to you. If you wanted to explain Darwin's idea that he thought he it was a particulate versus what was it? I can't remember what it was because he didn't know about DNA, so he had a different approach to heretics.
Particulate versus blended inheritance?
Yeah, blended inheritance, right?
Well, that's a fascinating subject. It's funny you should bring it up to me because I actually made a discovery about that in the British Library. Everybody assumed that Darwin only knew about blended inheritance. In other words, he thought it was like mixing paint. So, if you had a tall mother and a short father or vice versa, you would be middle height, or, one had brown eyes, one had blue eyes. And of course, Mendel showed much later that wasn't true, that in fact, genes are like quanta, they're packets. But one day in the early 90s, I was in the British Library and I just started looking up Darwin's letters, and I found a letter that Darwin wrote to Wallace, in which Darwin said that he was talking about one kind of butterfly that they had both been communicating with each other about. And he said, they only turn out one color or the other, they're never mixed. And then Darwin said, it's almost like, this is in the letter, he said, it's almost like you only get a male or a female. You never get, anything in between. And he kept going. This is a fairly short letter. It's one page. And what he came up with was basically the idea of particulate inheritance. So I got very excited. I'd never heard of this. I'd read a lot about Darwin. I'd never heard that he knew this. And I sent a copy to Richard Dawkins, who, is an expert on Darwin. And he had never heard of it. And in fact, it's included in one of his books. And he gives me credit for the discovery. So ironically enough, Dawkins and I had a correspondence back in the very early 90s.
That's amazing.
So it's funny you should raise that.
Yeah, I had no idea. I mean, I knew this was your expertise, right? But I had no idea that you had that level of correspondence with.
In fact, not only that,
Darwin,
it turns out, also did experiments with peas, just like Mendel did.
Oh, I think I remember that because I when I took biology, we had to do all the Mendel squares and the Punnett squares and all that crap. But the way I remember it, Darwin really did. I mean, I thought he was just somebody whose suggestion was blended because he didn't understand that, even though, correct me if I'm wrong, but DNA was kind of known about during his day, but he didn't really know about it. It was in the preliminary things that they kind of knew something about DNA, but not quite what it was.
Zero.
Nothing about it. Okay.
It wasn't even known that it existed.
All right.
And not only that, but the idea that the gene, and there was a concept of a gene, but it wasn't really understood that it was going to be a chemical. It was very, very confusing. And
He had an actual particle that he named for at one time, though. It wasn't this? Didn't he actually call it a specific name? What he thought it was? That was hereditary.
yes, that's right. He did. I forgot.
I don't
the
remember
name
what
now.
it
Went
called
out of
either.
my head.
But
Something that ended with Yule. Probably somebody in the chat knows. I don't know who's.
yeah, arcane knowledge.
I just don't remember. Gemule, something like
Gemule,
that.
yeah, Gemulo or Gemunin or yeah,
something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, he had a lot. I mean, Darwin was a brilliant guy. There's a lot of stuff he came up with that was dead wrong, which we don't usually talk about. But
you mean science? Wait, scientists get stuff wrong?
Yeah, I've heard that.
Wow. Philosophers, Nick,
Never
is that
happened
true?
to me. I don't know.
By the way,
Well,
Nick,
that's the good news about being a philosopher is if it looks like you got it wrong, you can just sort of change the
on the
precepts
dime,
that you
right?
apply to it. Yeah, you're just good. It's just no, man. I just changed the universe around my opinion.
And please forgive me, Nick. You and Cy have been on a hangout before, right? Together.
We've been in a hangout before, yeah, briefly, and then we were at the our Raw after party. And then he and I have chatted a bit. And in fact, this is good because I think he wanted to talk about
determinism.
Determinism, because this gets back into the consciousness question because.
Right.
When we're talking about consciousness, here's the thing. Whenever somebody tells me, well, gee, Nick, how do you account for consciousness? I'm perfectly happy to account for consciousness. I got no problem accounting for consciousness as soon as somebody tells me what it is. And I've never had someone in any meaningful way explain it to me other than in terms of things that can already be explained biologically. Now, if we get, and I use this argument for free will, but it works for both free will and consciousness. We know now roughly what it would take to create a computer. And Carl Sagan, now when he said this, admittedly, the computer needed to make the same number of calculations that a brain could make would have to have been the size of Texas and the height of the Empire State Building. Modern computers don't need to do that, but it still is prohibitive in terms of speed and heat with parallel processors or linear processors even going in parallel. When you have neural processors, where you have multiple processors that are capable of only performing a single calculation, but billions of them, and you create a neural network. If you create a neural network that is capable of making the same number, and this is about to get into thought experiment territory, but let's say you create a neural network computer capable of making the same number of calculations that a human brain can make and is mapped out in roughly the same way. Let's say that you give it the same inputs and you essentially raise it as a human being. The question is, would it pass a Turing test? Would anyone speaking with it be able to tell in any way whatsoever the difference between that and a human being? And if the answer is no, then my first question is, okay, where is consciousness and what is consciousness? If consciousness is something that this computer has now been imbued with, or is it simply the sum of these incredible parts, the staggering power of a neural network? And then again, to free will, I would argue that computer does not have free will, but it would be indistinguishable from the same thing as a chaotic system where a butterfly flapping its wings in China can cause a tornado in Texas. The factors that go into calculations are so astonishingly complex, we can't tell the difference between that and free will, but that doesn't mean it exists. And if we got a computer that you cannot tell the difference in any measurable way between it and a human being, where is free will and where is consciousness?
Well, I'd like to respond to that.
No. The reason we brought you on was to listen. I appreciate you listening.
No,
thank you very much.
I like listening. I like listening to you, Nick.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Because you're very eloquent and you raise some very good points, but I have some comments on them, and that is we don't know the answer whether such a computer could be built and whether, if it were built, it would pass the Turing test. But we do know a lot about, and we're learning more and more every day about neurobiology. And everything we learn about neurobiology suggests that it is different qualitatively than any kind of hardware we could build, because not only is the brain, the human brain, and probably some other brains as well, but certainly the human brain, not only is it amazingly complex in terms of its neurological circuits, but it's incredibly adaptable, self-adaptable. In other words, you actually get remodeling of the brain whenever you learn something. You don't just you get biological and biochemical changes and even anatomical changes in these neural networks all the time.
Yeah.
And that's astonishing. And I guess you could come up with some sort of machine that would do that, but it wouldn't. I mean, see, that's the thing about about biology. I'm a biologist and I like it. I like biology. And one of the things I love about it is that the more we learn about it, just the more unbelievable it is. It's just incredibly, and it's not just a question of complexity, which is true. It's this ability of biological systems to do almost anything, and one wonders how that's even feasible. I mean, if you just look at life, the forms of life that exist, there's almost nothing that some living organism can't do. If you just say something, yeah, there's going to be some insect or some creature that does that and does it well. And again, speaking of Dawkins, who I don't like to talk about when we discuss religion, but when it comes to science, he's brilliant. He's a pretty brilliant guy, and he has this analogy of a crane, that can lift things that are impossible to lift, and that's the power of natural selection. Natural selection can do absolutely astonishing things with enough time, and we've seen that in biology. So I'm a little less willing to put that all aside and say, well, it's like a really, really good machine. Actually, it's not. It's way beyond that when we talk about what is life. And by the way, we don't define life. I was just looking at one of my textbooks, and all the textbooks say life has all these properties, but there's no way to define it.
Well, that was Steve that was trying to define it. I would never try to do something like that. That was all Steve. I would never try to. No, I wouldn't be so arrogant to try to define life. But yeah.
And
sorry
it's the
for
same
interrupting.
consciousness. I mean, you mentioned consciousness, and it's kind of the same thing. I mean, it's also one of those things that we know what it is, but nobody can define it.
Can I go from a philosophical viewpoint on that? Because by the way, there's a little bit of pushback. Well, okay. Let's assume that a non-biological entity has been, as you said, you raise it, you're rearing it, you're teaching it. It has developed some form of consciousness that it appears to, whether it emulates it or it actually has it. It's a very difficult question. However, we have known that biological entities can have consciousness. Clearly, that seems to be self-evident. We also know through biology that we're very related to other primates, obviously, chimpanzees, orangutans, apes, things of that nature. So they theoretically, in far future, could develop some kind of consciousness that is equal to or superior to our own. So we know that from a biological sense. Now, at that point, I don't think you would say, "Hey, you know what? This primate, we don't even know if they can actually think." Well, we wouldn't say that, I don't think, because that would make it really a kind of an odd argument, because we are primates, we think. So what I think would be the case is that we all have to make certain assumptions about things like heart solipsism. We can't solve it. I can't, prove, as you can say, that you guys exist. I just have to axiomatically assume it. I think if it got to the point where artificial intelligence was so capable of what we would be considered to be independent thought, emotions, cognitive abilities, executive decision-making abilities, that we would have to at some point probably just assume, just like we would that you exist, that it is an actual conscious being. That's how I would look at it. And I think that'd be the natural progression of these things if that ever came to the point of that.
Well, and let me make a suggestion, because I think Cy brought up a couple of
No, you're not
good
allowed
points.
to.
As much as, well, good, because I was going to say he brought up a couple of good points, and that was the last thing I wanted to say. So I'll just...
Yeah, you could stop there. That's
Yeah,
fine.
that's it. Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure
Done.
that's a, yeah, no, Well, so no, this in essence got very quickly into thought experiment territory, and so it there's no way to prove, at least specifically right now, any of what I just said. So, and I think he sort of suggested, we couldn't prove what I'm saying. I do think that some of the objections that you have are ones that, at least by nature of the fact that we already understand the biology behind many of, like neuroelasticity, and so, for example, a neuron, the more often it fires, the faster it will fire, and the lower the activation energy for it to fire. Says me lecturing you on biology, which I really just realized.
He only has a PhD in this. What the hell does he know?
But there's already software programs that sort of emulate that, and learning technology, and specifically also facial recognition, but any kind of neural network software that emulates a neural network on a linear processor system usually tries to find a way to emulate that as well, where the only way it can possibly learn is every time a specific pattern triggers along the network, the activation energy for each of those nodes on the network becomes lowered.
Right.
Yeah. So that is a way to at least simulate at least a very, very small part of what you're talking about. And it seems to me that the larger elements of what you're talking about should also be at some point reasonably able to be simulated. So while I agree that we don't have specifically the hardware to do everything that I'm saying, we're once we get a quantum computer, we already have the theoretical knowledge of how to build a quote sentient machine, a machine that has at a minimum the capacity to make as many calculations as we can. The question as to what it well, when I say as many, because here's the thing. I mean, a linear processor can obviously make it. Well, it depends on how you measure processing power. A linear processor can make trillions and billions and trillions, whatever, of calculations a second. We can't make that many complex calculations, but we make actually far more individual ones for if you consider each neuron a single processor that makes just either sort of a fired or not fired, if you really want to get silly about trying to compare it to a computer. So now that makes us in some ways much slower. We can't do the single complex mathematical equations, but we are unbelievable much better at pattern recognition and adapting. So the question is how to get a computer to do that, and so far the only way we've come up with is to get it to do a neural network.
Right, but let me just interject one second. When you talk about linear computing, that's one thing we absolutely do know about the brain, is that it is not a linear computer. It is what would I call it?
Exponential.
Well,
it has the ability to do multiple things at the same time, though. I mean, it's parallel processing,
and it goes in branches. I mean, it's hard to.
Well, that's a neural. It's a neural. It's a neural network.
It's a neural network, but there can be linear neural networks, and then there are networks which just are totally nonlinear, meaning that they don't actually respond to any kind of linear mathematics. You need to have
P versus NP stuff.
That's right.
By the way, but what's the wattage of the brain? Like 5 watts, if I remember correctly, something along those lines. It's not very much, right? So, I mean, the power draw for the brain is extremely low, considering the capability of how much processing it actually does. And most of the processing it does, we're unaware of all the time. It actually does all this shit, and then just we're aware of it at a certain time. But all the things that it does is 99.999%, I guess, behind the scenes, is it not? I mean, we're not really aware of the shit that it actually. I mean, when we get thrown a ball, the brain does all the processing of how to actually catch the thing. That's a lot of work.
And, I mean, it's 5 watts doesn't sound like a lot, but the brain is the most energy intensive organ by far. I mean, there's nothing like it anywhere else in the body, and as soon as you don't eat or you don't have enough energy for whatever reason, you know it first in your brain. You stop. Everything else is working, but you can't come up with a word.
That explains flat earthers.
Yeah, it also
Yeah.
explains me.
Yeah. so what you're saying is flat earthers should eat more.
Well, that might help. It
wouldn't hurt. Well, that happened when people started on the Atkins diet too. The Atkins diet, people actually, while they were on the diet, the drop in carbs actually, they would have like a 20 or 30% drop in IQ just while they were on the diet, and then once they started.
The brain needs a huge amount of energy and generates a huge amount of heat. I mean, it's the thermodynamics of neurology is fascinating. I don't know anything about it, but I know it's an interesting subject. So anyway, I think that this whole issue of it's very hard to say no, because we made a lot of advances in AI, obviously, and it looks like we're going to keep going that way. And it's very hard to say we'll never get to a passing grade on the Turing machine test. I don't think we will, but how do you know? I mean, maybe we will at some point, and at that point we will have, conscious machines, as you said, and then consciousness is nothing mystical. It's probably the result of a very high level of complexity, and the most complex thing that exists in the universe at this point is the human brain, without doubt, by far.
If it's any consolation, I've met a number of people on Twitter that I don't think could pass a Turing test. So that's just.
Well, you do know that many of them seriously are actually bots, right? I mean...
Well, I know that some of them are, but I've met people who engage me, and I'm just like, well. I was going to get into because I find neural networks fascinating, and I used to teach computer science, so this is one area that
right.
Yeah, but I also know we skipped a couple super chats, so I didn't know if we wanted to get into the super chats or do the thing that I like about the neural networks is, of course, that's true. So the difference between a neural network can be viewed as, if you wanted to, you could view a neural network as trillions of processors. So instead of saying it's you got a CPU, a neural network is trillions of CPUs, but they can be firing at in any combination in any given order, and each CPU is actually only capable of doing an extraordinarily small calculation, whereas a CPU in a computer can do any number of very, very complicated calculations, but it can only do one at a time, very, very rapidly, but it can only do one at a time. And so what the advantage of the neural network, that's why it's so good at pattern matching, is because when you sum up all of the different calculations made almost simultaneously, it's sort of a cascade pattern match of whatever it sees in front of it. It's just all of these neurons start to fire, and you come out with a pattern at the end that generates the solution. A single processor, well, far better at calculating pi to the 2 billionth digit, cannot calculate all of those fine little details that the neural network can. But if you wanted to, you could view it as trillions and trillions of parallel processors, or as any number of, but they're tiny. They can't do anything but really just fired or not fired, on or off.
Hey, by the way, should we have a pi off one of these days? I know Dr. Kroon knows, he says he knows pi to a couple hundred decimal places. I know it 20. I got Astronomy Live in here, by the way. He might know it to how many places do you know pi? By the way, do you use I know your first name, but I don't know if you use it in public. Do you?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I just stick to Astronomy Live.
All right, we're going to call you AL.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
I'm on Landon's team. I'm just saying, Landon, no, I'm on his team. Right. Or else he speaks for me.
How many places do you know pi? Astronomy Live.
Just 2 digits. I mean, that's good enough for me usually.
That's like me.
You know what? We just rounded to 3. Any handed pi bill, they said it was fine. That actually almost got passed, by the way. It actually got passed in the state house, I believe, and then it was going to be passed in the Senate. But there was a mathematician in the audience that said, "Wait, no, you can't.
You can't just change it.
You're trying to change the fundamental constants of the universe. What do you think, you're God?"
Oh my!
Yeah, we could probably spend forever just on this particular topic. I didn't realize how deep it was. Plus, we could get Dr. Gary Merritt in here one of these days, because we just had this discussion with him not too long ago. Sisyphus Redeemed.
Steve, can I just say one thing before we leave this neurology subject that might be interesting to Nick?
Yes.
So we've been talking about neural networks and how complex they are and how they rewire and how they do all these things. But if we now drill down to a single neuron, one cell in that amazing, billions of cells in these networks, if you just look at one neuron, the way every cell in the body works is with another kind of networks called gene regulatory networks, which determine which genes are expressed and which are turned off. And those regulatory networks for gene expression are just as complicated as the neural networks.
Isn't that like the processing power to determine, like for example, like determining what is actually causing what regulation is because there's so many genes involved and it's such a complex metabolic pathway to determine how much expression level a certain gene's at that is almost even the computers we have today can't do it. Kind of like protein folding problem.
It's very, very difficult, but many of the networks have been elucidated, and they're incredibly complicated. They can involve 100 to 500 genes, and they're all turning each other on and off in all kinds of ways. I mean, the theory behind this is
that's pretty complicated.
Incredibly
if you got that many genes.
So now think of this almost like a fractal. You have these really complex neural networks composed of fibers and cells. And then within each cell, you have the same level of complexity at a lower level.
And you guys are hitting on my actual area of expertise tonight.
He knows the stuff too. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's even more complicated than just gene expression. At one level, you have how much a particular gene is being expressed, meaning. So for those who don't know, you have your DNA in your nucleus. And that gets translated into mRNA, messenger RNA, which would then get normally translated into protein. So you have the genetic level, you have the gene expression level, how many copies of a particular gene are being made. It's like faxing off blueprints. Okay, you're making copies of the original blueprints. The copies are your RNA. Then that gets turned into a physical thing with translating it into protein. Even once you get past the gene expression level, that's just one layer. On top of that layer, you have regulatory control over how many copies actually get used. Just because a gene is copied doesn't mean it actually will turn into protein. And you can have alternative splicing. A particular gene could be spliced in different ways. And so the RNA might actually code, or the original gene might code for multiple different types of protein. And then on top of that, as if that wasn't enough, even once it becomes protein, it gets folded, it gets modifications put onto it sometimes. And depending on how those modifications are applied, that protein might or might not be functional or might have different functions. So there's many, 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 many layers of complexity that are all layered in terms of regulatory control that start at the gene level and go all the way up to the protein level. And one of the big challenges right now is understanding what is pulling all those levers. Because sometimes things will get out of control, get out of balance, and then you end up with neurological diseases like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and others. And oftentimes what is happening there is there's problems going wrong with the protein at a higher level where the protein is maybe phosphorylated too much or too little, and it's taking on a shape that is detrimental. And trying to understand how it got to that state is very complicated because there's all these different layers of control. And it's not simple to be able to fix it either, because if you just go in with a drug, a pharmaceutical compound, and you're hitting a particular pathway that maybe dephosphorylates a particular protein or changes it, trying to get it back to a normal state, it can have a lot of off-target effects. It can affect other proteins and dephosphorylate them, and then maybe you end up with symptoms that are really bad, or maybe it just it's not able to be effective enough on the protein you're trying to target before you end up hitting toxic levels from hitting other off-target proteins. So, yeah, it's a really complicated problem.
How sad is it that when I took biology, I would have no idea what the hell he just said, and now I do understand what he said. It's weird. By the way, he's an astronomy guy. That's the name, Astronomy Live. But look at what his knowledge level in biology is.
That's impressive.
That is amazing, right? Yeah, the guy's pretty damn smart. Let me ask the biochemist in the room, though. He's talking about alternative splicing for RNA. How is it that selection has been able to do something like that, where you have a certain DNA segment or in a gene that's being encoded into mRNA that's going to be translated into a protein that could be alternately spliced to cause different proteins to have different functions. That seems really pretty amazing to me.
It is very amazing, and I
I
don't
knew what
know.
he said.
That was great. No, you're right.
He knows his
You got
shit.
it completely. Alternative splicing and post modification of proteins is not recent in biology. It goes back quite a ways. I don't remember how far, but pretty far back. And the way, your question, how could something like this evolve with natural selection, is not easy to answer because we don't know what the selective pressures were to come up with that. It looks from here that what it does is it allows for one sequence of DNA to actually code for many proteins, because if you have alternate splicing, you can cut it here, cut it there, or you can actually start the transcript at a different place and you get a different sequence, so you get a different protein. So there are all these amazing tricks that happen at this level of biological function, which we know they came from natural selection, but it's not always obvious where the selection pressure was that allowed this to happen.
Like a frame shift or something, or like let's say you have a nuclear.
Yeah, frame shift would do that.
Yeah,
Right,
let's
exactly.
say, and I also find it amazing. Let's say you do have an amino acid substitution in a protein, and yet some of them are so similar depending on the properties that they have that the protein still is able to do a certain function. So like cytochrome C, for example, if I remember correctly, has like 48% of it has been varied, and it still has some of the similar things for apoptosis and for electron transport chains. So that to me is pretty amazing that you can have that much difference in the amino acid chains and still work.
But that's called its robustness, and that's actually critical for evolution, because this is work that Andreas Wagner and his colleagues have been doing for a while. Is the reason, sometimes you hear an argument that evolution can't work because the chances of getting a particular protein are 1 in 10 to the whatever. But that's not a good argument, because it's not only one protein that can do a particular job. There are hundreds of thousands of sequences that can do the same job. So what happens is you can get mutations that move the sequence space of a protein a little bit, and it's still robust enough to do the same job. And then at a certain point, you get one more mutation, and now it's doing something completely different. And this occurs all the time in biology. And it's very...
this is fascinating. I mean, I don't know how we went from philosophy to biology, but Nick, I don't have a problem. I think
biology is much better than philosophy.
Oh, yeah, now you're just crazy.
I think this isn't Ask a Biologist. Who lets Cy in the room?
I don't know. He gets the
hell happened.
How did I get an astronomer in here too?
I thought he was going to
astronomer who knows biology. This is amazing.
This is
and computer programming.
Full disclosure, my profession is not astronomy, and I have to keep reiterating that on my channel because it's just a hobby for me. It's an obsession, but it's just a hobby.
I'm not going to give too much information about you, but I think I do know kind of what you do. You do a lot of computer stuff.
Yeah. I'm more like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ian Musgrave, another popular amateur astronomer online. Anyway, he's a biologist by day, but his hobby is astronomy. Most people online know him for astronomy. That's how most people know me. But I have more biological pursuits for profession.
Gotcha.
But
I think I recall something along those lines. But what's funny is it doesn't matter what science you're in. It seems like a lot of people that are just in one science, they want to know about other sciences as well, because there's a consilience between all of them, except for like geology. I'm never going to understand geology. Sorry, Steve Bowman. I'm never going to understand it. Bowerman. But geology is like my hardest subject. But one of these days we'll get to ask a geologist. But we got other super chats, so I think we're going to have to move on to another topic if that's okay.
Please.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So here we go. OB1 Vlog says, for two Australian, are there differences between moral and ethical? So he wants to know if there's a difference between morals and ethics. Anyone? I mean, I could throw it out there, but you're not gonna like my answer. Because my answer is not really. The only time that I've ever seen any distinguishing characteristics between morals and ethics is when you're talking about a business environment. Sometimes they'll be very specific that one's internal, one's external factors. So there's a minor differentiation. But for all practical purposes, when I'm talking about moral discourse or when I've read anything on moral discourse, these terms, morals and ethics, have been used almost interchangeably, with some minor exceptions about, again, whether things are internalized as far as what we ought to do, as opposed to having other factors that are influencing us to make these decisions. But other than that, no. To me, I don't really have any distinguishing characteristics between the two. You guys, what about you guys think?
I I think morals is usually thought of. I think more often than not they're interchangeable, except perhaps in the context like a legal setting or something like that. I think morals is if you're going to differentiate them, morals is thought of as the expression of ethics. So if someone has an ethical system, their morals are the expression of that ethics. But
Sure, we agree with that.
that's the only, and even that's a bit more of a semantic difference than an actual one. It's almost a difference without a distinction.
But I can also say that if I say to somebody like, "Hey, Astronomy Live, what's your ethical framework?" or ask them, "What's your moral framework?" I'm really asking the same thing. What do you think we should do in a given situation normatively for normative theories of ethics? This is why I don't even care about meta ethics that much. It's like that doesn't really tell you what you ought to do. It tells you if the propositions can actually be true or false. And I rather care about, hey, you as a person, what do you think is moral? What would you do in this situation, especially in business? In business, that's what I call them, business ethics. They want to know what you're going to do given a certain situation. I'm sure Sai has had many classes on bioethics, and so you too, Astronomy Live. Have you guys ever, you dive right into hardcore ethics? Because what is ethical? I mean, considering like what they've done with CRISPR. The Chinese doctor that I think was completely unethical. He was so unethical they're literally considering giving him the death penalty. That's pretty egregious.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, that's pretty egregious. So bioethicacy is a major concern, especially dealing with these two gentlemen's topic of discussion. Right?
And I personally, in my own experience, I felt like that was something that was, to be honest, a bit neglected in my training, at least at the PhD level. We were required, and so I was, full disclosure here too, I was in a very immature PhD program. I was the first student through this program, and there have been many students come through since then, but we kind of had to make it up as we went along, and there was a requirement that we had an ethics course in there. And my boss, who was also my supervisor, who was also overseeing the program, was supposed to teach this ethics course. And she kept procrastinating on putting together any kind of syllabus or coursework for it. And at the end of the day, it ended up being, here, go online to this website and take this quiz, was pretty much it. So
I actually taught bioethics at New York University Medical Center. And this is bioethics, not medical ethics. And I know exactly what astronomy is talking about because I had to make the course up from scratch, basically, using some resources that were available. But it was not something that most people spend a lot of time on. Certainly not medical students.
See, I think it should be taught in grade school. I think we should have logic courses, basic ethics, basic philosophy. Yeah. I really wish I did. Now, I gotta tell people, and they already probably know this. I hated philosophy 7 years ago. I was that guy. I really was. I admit it. I had a PhD friend of mine who got his PhD when he was like 26 or something like that. Really young kid. I think it was even earlier than that. And he was working on a secondary PhD. He got a master's degree and then an associate degree in applied mathematics. One of the smartest guys I've ever met. And he would run circles around me. Right? I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. It was like 7, 8, 9, maybe even a decade ago. I got sick of it, right? Then I got introduced to the YouTube and I was like, you know what? I'm going to start learning this stuff. And I'm so glad that I did. But I really wish that I really had exposure to that growing up, because I don't think people nowadays are exposed to critical thinking until much later on in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, somebody says I'm still that guy. Fair enough. Fair enough. Would you guys agree on that? That should be part of the curriculum of just basic reasoning skills and critical thinking and logic. I think it'd make a big difference.
Well, and just even how to identify, sort of the like even the most affirming the consequent confirmation bias, any of those things, just understanding, because we shoot ourselves in the foot so often by not knowing these things and not knowing when we're engaging in them.
Yeah, I didn't know what I didn't. I took really one philosophy course, and that was called Critical Thinking and Contemporary Rhetoric. And I was exposed to fallacies, and I of course, this was all news to me. And I was like, this, you use this to look at the media, the news, and it puts it in a whole different light. How much fallacies they use, and marketing, and when they go after targeted marketing, things like that. These are all manipulation techniques using fallacious reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
So. Well, and I'm sure Sai's seen this. My wife sees this a lot, where because my wife also has a degree in biochemistry, and she will see a stunning new scientific discovery come out where they find a correlation between any two things. And the media will come out and say, it's now been demonstrated that, this causes
Have
that.
You seen that site where they put any two, they match all these these two things that appear to have relationships that are completely unrelated?
We do that on the Codex. If we have a calculator, if you figure out how many people, if you want to know how many people died or if you say how many people died on any given day, it can tell you roughly how much ice cream was sold on that day, because those two numbers are in fact correlated. The reason they're correlated is because usually on hotter days, more people die. There's more activity. They go out. They get hit by cars. More cars on the road. Yada yada. And more people buy ice cream. So
vanilla causes deaths is actually the cause.
Or it's vanilla ice cream. That's the other one. Is people just they'd rather shoot themselves than taste vanilla ice cream. But
I love vanilla. That's like my favorite flavor. Back off. I'm simple.
Yeah. So and then what happens is people who don't have that kind of education, first of all, it gets really annoying, because then you'll see people come out and they'll criticize that and say, didn't scientists, 2 or 3 years ago say that the opposite caused this? They didn't say anything caused anything in either of these cases. If you understand what was actually said, but the media either, and sometimes I figure it's either because the people who are running the editors and the who are running these things don't understand the difference, or they don't care and are just trying to sell news stories. I don't know which it is, but it's, or a lot of both. But it's really sad to watch, because it's also part of what scientists were aware early on that the Earth was cooling. We knew that in the 80s, we knew the Earth was cooling. We also knew there was another effect that was going on that would cause the Earth to get warmer. Just didn't know which. Didn't know which was going to be the larger effect. Nobody had figured it out yet. But a lot of people started writing books on, the Earth is getting cooler, and then comes out, oh no, Earth is getting warmer. Like, well, why won't scientists make up their mind? They never said it was getting cooler. They said it was.
I remember that. I remember growing up, and by the way, I was guilty of this several years ago, of perpetuating that myth about, scientists were saying that it was cooling. I was that guy again, decade plus ago. But subsequently, I have educated myself on this particular topic and found out you're exactly right. That was actually something that was taken from some kind of like pseudo thing, and then people ran with it, and they were attributing it to scientists. Scientists were not actually thinking that the Earth was cooling. They've actually known that the Earth was actually warming up for a very long period of time. And I think it's like, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like 1.8 C in the last 200 years, something along those lines.
I do not even play a climatologist or climate scientist on TV or on the internet, so I'm going to stay in my lane on that one.
Well, that's why I got the live chat. Hey, look, I'm the dumbest guy in the room right now, and I'm thrilled to be so. That's my favorite position to be in. I like being the dumbest person, because that way I get to learn shit. But the live chat that I have, there's smart people too that probably would know this. But I think it's about 1.8 Celsius that has been over the last 200 years, which is pretty significant, actually. Okay, so I think killed that question.
It's 1.6, I think, degrees Celsius.
Okay, well, you know what?
1.6.
Margin of error. Okay. Cut me some slack. What are you going to do? Say I'm a complete idiot? Okay. Yeah. So, and by the way, depends on the study. Chris asked for $5, what's more important, doing the right thing or doing things right? Wow, profound questions tonight.
Doing the right thing. You can do things right, but if you're killing someone but you do it right, I'm not impressed.
Yes.
Well, it depends on your domain of discourse there. I mean, the biologist in the room might, disagree from the philosopher in the room. So I don't know if there's a correct answer to that. It really
This
depends.
is Ask a Philosopher. I'm going to pull rank and say
Fair
we're going
enough.
to go with the
Yes,
philosopher's
next
answer.
show. Screw you people. How did you even get in here? Go ahead, Nick.
Oh, no, I gave my answer. Let's hear it. Mine is. Listen, if you murder someone right, it's still murder. So let's go
yeah,
with,
but if you're doing open heart surgery, I'm going to go with doing things right rather than doing the right thing, because you might have to break certain things.
okay.
You know, I'm not against ethical violations of law and things like that. If there's higher ethical standards to be had, you're saying by somebody's life, I would break a rule to do that, and so I would say doing things right in that regard. What do you think? Oh, go ahead.
I'm a consequentialist.
Oh, you
so
would be. I knew that about you. I don't. Whatever.
I'm a consequentialist.
You
so it
and
doesn't
your
matter either way.
consequentialism and utilitarianism, which are related, but I don't know if I really go to that side. I tend to more virtue ethics stuff. But anyways, Sai, what do you think? Did you freeze? Are you stunned?
No. I'm here. I agree with Nick. I mean, obviously,
You would.
Well, you said the same thing.
I know.
He would not. He came in. He came in to tell me all about neural networks, and I was gonna.
So, what do you think, Astronomy Life? Doing the right thing or doing things right?
I will go with doing the right thing.
Oh.
Because I very rarely do things right. I often do things wrong, but I always try to do the right thing.
I would say they're intricately related. If you're doing the right
Amen.
thing, if you do things right, you're probably doing the right thing. So it might be
No.
you know.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, that's speaking of affirming the consequent. Like,
Isn't that what science does? Science just affirms the consequence from what I understand. All right. Neville 11 $5 is the ability to determine what is right or wrong. Oh, excuse me. Let me read this again. Is the ability to determine what is right and what is wrong inherent or learned? Wow, they're like going for blood on this shit. This is like we're gonna try to have deep, profound answers here, and yet they're really asking some serious shit. So, what do you think?
I think it's a combination. I think we, through evolution, have an instinct for certain virtues, says again the consequentialist. I think that we have an instinct for charity. I think we have an instinct for working together for a number of reasons. We have an instinct for disliking injustice. I think, however, how we define injustice and what it means is very malleable and can be changed both based on our experiences. If you're beaten as a child, that's going to have a significant impact on what you consider justice to be, even if you're in a normatively, ideal society. But also, even if you grow up with if you grow up in within the norms of a certain culture, if that culture is, ancient Mexico, where burying children alive is considered okay, you're gonna be influenced by that. But within, I think we have specific instincts, and then we have a framework that can sort of is flexibly imposed upon that.
So you tend to like to. I accept descriptive moral relativism, but you tend to more moral subjectivism and moral relativism. I do tend to more objective morality, but reasons I actually like moral nihilism, but it doesn't really matter. Again, meta ethics, who cares? But whatever.
I have not found an objective moral system that I like. I have found objective moral systems that work within a subjective framework, but in terms of trying to find one that's outside of that, I've never found one.
That's not possible. That's why. All objective moral frameworks will have a subjective grounding to it, just like mathematics has, arbitrary axioms. So once you get the axioms, then you can provide an objective moral framework. So what you're asking for, you won't find, because that's not how it works. You have to have a subjective, arbitrary.
I agree, but not a lot of theists agree.
Well, yeah, but who cares what they think? No, I'm kidding. I'm sorry. I'm kidding. Sorry. No, I don't. Sai, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you actually have the position that you must have a deity to have an objective moral framework. I think you argue, correct me if I'm wrong, that because there's a deity, you can have an objective moral framework from that.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. I mean, I was an atheist most of my life, and I was just as moral. Well, almost just as moral.
Like hell you were, you sly dog.
I mean, I guess it depends on who you talk to. But, I don't think that that it's you must believe in God to be moral. And I think a lot of Christians, if not most Christians, agree with me. It's kind of ridiculous to go around thinking that anyone who doesn't believe in God must be immoral. I just don't see that.
And I think everybody would agree with that. That is the most rational position that I think is normative.
so.
But the harder question is, and I'll ask all you the same question: if there was not a God, could there be morality? Because a lot of theists have the position that there could not even exist morality unless some deity exists, whether you believe in him or not.
And that's my point, is that there's no metaphysical objective. You don't have so I agree with Sai. If there was a God, that you could have this you wouldn't have to believe in that God could grant ethics, and then you'd have an objective system, even if you didn't know it or subscribe to it even. I don't think, because I don't believe in such a God, I think that any system you have is going to have to be anchored without that I wasn't going to say meta-ethical, I was going to say metaphysical grounding.
Yeah. By the way, Smithy corrects me. Not everybody would think that way. Let me phrase that. Most people that have a rational approach to things would agree with what we just said. Not all. No, they're flat earthers, think the Earth is flat, for Pete's sake. So yeah, fair enough. But I was trying my life. What do you think? I mean, to me, even with the deity, to me it really goes into ethical subjectivism, because you're dealing with the mind of God. He can control what is moral, and it's so subjective from the mind of God. Therefore, it is not something that I have access to. I look at objectivity when it comes to objective morals as, can I access that moral fact? If you got a toothache, I cannot access that. It is forever epistemically isolated from me. And so if God says, hey, you know what? This is what's moral, I can't access that fact. I got to take his word for it, in which case it's ethical subjectivism.
You're already outside of my depth. I never
just
thought
say
of it
yes,
that deeply.
Just say yes.
But
just say yes.
Stay in your lane. Oh,
stay in my lane. Yeah. Well,
I'm the dumbest one in the room here. What does that tell you? These guys are like the brilliant people. Jeez.
I wish I had a better grasp of the scientific literature when it comes to developmental neuroscience, but from what little I can glean and sort of rack my brain for, I want to say that studies have shown that there are some indications that very young children do have a sense of, I guess you could say, instinctive morality. But they also tend to be somewhat selfish. Like, you have to teach children to share, for example. But even a very young child can understand some sense of good versus evil in the context of this person over here, this adult is being very helpful and loving, versus this adult is being very off-putting or not nurturing. So I think there is biologically some sense of morality that is ingrained in us from birth, but we do have to learn certain behaviors that are socially helpful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, we see that in primates as well, right? I mean, nobody teaches these things to them, and that they do have some kind of things like empathy and understanding, compassion. And
sure.
So yeah, I think we have a basic understanding of what's right and wrong, although we may not call it that, right? If we were never exposed to language to determine what it would be to be right or wrong, any kind of ethical framework, I think we have an innate ability to kind of know, whether it be from self-preservation or wanting something else not to cause harm, because we have empathy with them, or we have feelings for them. Therefore, we kind of do the right thing, maybe because it has, as I guess the consequentialists in the room would say, consequences. But they don't think this way. I mean, they're not thinking it on a high level. But I do think a lot of it is learned. I think when people ask me, where do you get your morals from? I'm happy to say I think a lot of it comes from my rearing and my parents. And yet some theists will laugh at that. They go, that's so stupid, Steve. Well, no, I don't think it's stupid at all. Matter of fact, I think it makes a sense that most of our ethics and our morals start by emulating that of those who were around, including our parents.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. But one thing that is interesting, which actually comes from what Astronomy Live just said, is that we do seem to be born, and every human being, with a very few number of exceptions, has one thing in common, and that is we all know that there is something that is right and something that is wrong, and we may differ on what those definitions are culturally and historically, but everybody feels guilty if they do the wrong thing, or should feel guilty, or some level feels guilty. Everybody feels that other people have done the right thing or the wrong thing, and so that's something that seems to be, in inbred in us that we have naturally as a consequence of who we are. And from the theistic point of view, one way to interpret that is to say that is what God granted humans, is not so much what is, because after all, God had to tell you what's right and what's wrong, but humans were born knowing that good and evil exist,
So
that they are actual things.
So where do you fall in the euphophro dilemma then?
Sorry?
Where do you fall in the the euphophro dilemma? Where do you fall on that?
And I don't know what that is.
The euphophro dilemma is basically, does God tell people what is good because it's good, or is it good because God tells people it's good? What is pious? Okay,
That, I don't know.
It's a very it's an unanswerable question, and I think that
I have no idea.
People have been trying to answer that question forever. And the reason it's such a hard question is because if God commands something to be good, does He do so because there's reasons, which means there's something of higher value, which goes into what's called axiology, that is higher than God, that God has to adhere to, which seems kind of contradictory in some ways, because He's supposed to be the highest thing. Why is He beholden to say that this has to be good? And if it's not, then it's arbitrary, which means that God has picked some arbitrary reason to say this is good. So that problem is a very difficult problem to answer to, whether things are good because He commands it, or because it's something that He has to command because it's good. Nick,
you
dilemma is difficult, I think.
Yeah, I subscribe to divine command theory. So I think if there was a God, everything that He would say would necessarily be good by definition.
But divine command theory falls under ethical subjectivism, though. Well, there are some versions that fall into ethical objectivism, especially if you ask Eve Canaan, but whatever.
And that's sort of I think it would necessarily be objective, but that would only be in the case where you could, if God somehow was coming down and talking to you. I mean, divine command theory assumes that you are listening to God. The problem with divine command theory is, Muslims who fly planes into buildings believe that they are following the same divine command theory as crusaders who are trying to recapture.
See, my problem with divine command theory is that you're believing that you're just saying that my moral framework is contingent upon somebody else, which, by the way, I think abdicates your own personal responsibility. It was Sisyphus Redeems. No, I'm sorry. It wasn't Sisyphus Redeems. By the way, I love his channel though. But it was actually Ozzy that had a video at one time on this, where he made a very, very good, strong argument that people that subscribe to divine command theory, which, by the way, I know you don't actually subscribe to it, but if you did, that would be the case.
I just say if there were a God, I would believe it. Yes.
He makes a very good case that the theists that actually do subscribe to divine command theory, never really formulate a really strong moral and ethical framework, because they're just passing the buck and saying, well, this is good because God says it's good. They don't do any of the hard heavy lifting, as like I alluded to with natural selection. By the way, I forgot what I was going to say. Photo would disagree with you on that. Photo actually thinks that natural selection doesn't do any of the heavy lifting, if you know that argument. But for another time. That's a philosophical argument. I don't know if have you ever experienced that particular argument? It's really it's been a thorn in the side in the community for a long time. But Fordo's argument against natural selection, have you ever heard of that?
No.
Okay.
Tell me. I've heard of the argument. I don't know what his.
Well, it'd be too complicated to get into. But in a nutshell, Photo's argument deals with does natural selection actually explain anything? It's based upon an old philosophical argument dealing with what's called intentionality. And he just kind of applied it to natural selection. And again, I'm going to default back to Ozzy. He has a great way of explaining it. It's basically saying, hey, Cy, I'm going to tell you how to get rich. And you say, great, tell me how to get rich, Steve. Okay. So how to get rich is you buy low and sell high. Okay, well, that's true. I mean, that's clearly true. Natural selection is clearly true. It happens. But does it really explain anything? And so Photo's argument deals with, does natural selection really explain anything? Because you have to explain why it selects for one coextensive trait over another. So if you have two coextensive traits that have to exist at the same time, why does it select one for the other? And then you have what's called an intentionality issue, where if you change one of the coextensive traits for the other, it could actually change the value of the proposition. And so it's, again, really complicated shit that took most of us probably about 2 months to figure out. We were diving into this years ago.
Yeah, it's way over my head.
Oh, it's hard. Oh, it's one of the most difficult. I got to tell you,
I
Frodo's
can't-
argument is one of the most
can't get it.
complicated arguments I've ever seen, but it's interesting. People
I've
in live chat remember this shit. They're like, no more Frodo. But he is a philosopher. He accepts evolution and biologist. He just runs a very philosophical argument. What, Nick? I'm sorry.
Oh
Tangent.
no, there was somebody else who wanted to join. I can send you their
Who?
Raphael Nietzsche 13. Nietzsche
Do I know
13.
this person?
I don't know this
I don't know
person,
this person
but they seem very interested. But I can send you the. I don't know who they are.
All right. have them message me
We
on
do
DM.
need. What I would love to do though is so next time I'm going to do with Ozzy ichthyism and non-cog,
Mhm.
and then maybe after that I would love to do the divine command theory because
Sure.
I think that if Ozzy's got an answer to that one, I would love.
Well, it's not really an
to-
answer. He just argues that the theists never really develop a really good moral framework because they've abdicated the responsibility to that to God. And like most of us have sat and we thought about these things. What is the good? You know, what does it mean to be good? How could you even describe good in terms of a naturalistic thing, or is you end up with the natural fallacies, the naturalist fallacy? So we like to think what would we do in a given situation, because there are some hard moral questions out there of what you should do.
But then it almost sounds to me like you could still use kind of size argument on that, which is okay. God's given these sort of general commands, but how and whether or not you even follow them is again whether good or evil per se, and that's where you would have. That's where the rubber.
You're guessing though, but you're basically saying this is what I think God
well,
wants.
That's the problem is when you have to do the guessing. That's when there's a problem with divine command theory.
All right. Sarah Bia asked for $5. This was that sigh. He says, in all this talk of program and design, how does I agree natural selection is random, yet say biological teleology is a real thing in the process? So I think he's asking, I have to usually parse Sarah Bia. If natural selection is random, then...
That's what you get for coming onto a philosophy show. That's what you get for coming on.
Then how do you say that biological teleology is a real thing? And that's a fair question. I mean, because theologically would say that it's not random; it's actually guided by the hand of God or something intelligent.
Well, no, it's not random whether or not theism is true. I mean, natural selection is not random. It's what makes evolution non-random because it depends on the environment. It depends on the
right, but what if
survival.
God exists though? If God, okay, that's absolutely true from a biological sense. But if God wanted man, like for example, Dr. Hugh Ross's argument, and another person I really do respect. Getting to meet him was such a treat. But his position is that yes, all this stuff is true. It's all random, but God somehow guided it so 4.5 billion years later, after the Earth was there, man would be exist to a state of being ensouled, which somehow would entail God making all these little changes. And I can't remember what they call it.
Convert. Well, look. So the teleological argument is a very interesting one. I actually published a paper on that on teleology and evolution, and it's very. What I ended up with one idea, and as I was working on it, I realized it was so complicated I probably wasn't going to get anywhere. But there are a lot of data now about something called convergence, where it appears that evolution, which we used to think of as completely open-ended, and it's kind of what I said before, anything can happen. There's so much diversity in the biological world, it seems that anything can happen. But it turns out that's not true. There are a lot of constraints on what can actually occur in living organisms, and that's shown by this phenomenon of convergence, where completely different lineages come up with the same solution, the same biological solution to a problem, like flying. Okay, so they all come up with wings that beat wings, and seeing, interacting with the environment. Eyes have developed in totally different lineages by different ways, and sometimes those eyes are very similar. The octopus, which is an invertebrate, has an eye very much like mammals. So this kind of convergence seems to imply that it's not just natural selection. There's something else that's sort of guiding evolution along certain paths, and this goes back to the famous Gould quote if you rewound the tape of life, you would get a completely different picture. And probably that's not correct. You may get a different picture, but it wouldn't be absolutely different because some things just keep happening over and over again in the biological world. And that looks like, there is some kind of direction. Now, is this teleological in the Aristotelian sense? No. And in fact, that's why Meyer invented the phrase, the word teleonomy, because that avoids the idea that there is an agent that has a purpose and therefore guides evolution to reach that purpose, which is Hugh's point. Mm-hmm. I don't know where I stand on that personally. Sometimes I'm in favor of that. Sometimes I'm not, depending on who I'm talking to often. But the teleonomy idea kind of gets away from that problem because it suggests that what it's basically saying is that you can have the appearance of purpose based on a program. And of course, biology is based on a program, and that program is the genetic code, because you don't have evolution without a genetic code. So that's where, and of course Meyer was not a theist, but he felt that it's kind of ridiculous, and most biologists have now chimed in, have agreed with this, that it's kind of ridiculous to try to avoid the idea of even using teleological language, because animals have purposes. They do things for a reason. Biomolecules have functions.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with those. People avoid those words, and I wish they would stop.
And it's silly. Words. It's really silly to avoid them. So I think it's a very difficult question. Hugh's attitude, which I sometimes, he convinces me when I hear him speak.
He is a great speaker. I mean,
yeah.
He is real, and he's so genuine. He really, of all the theists I've ever met, he believes wholeheartedly everything that he says with conviction. I mean, he's just that type of person.
And he's a very good guy. I actually had a chance to meet him this summer, so that was nice.
I will say this: in regards to words like purpose, I would much rather use words like purpose, but I find, especially if I'm talking to theists and if I'm talking as an atheist or anti-theist, I can't use that word. And the reason I can't use that word is because the second I do, they equivocate with that word and think
jump on you.
Let them. This is the thing. Take it back. I mean, when I say the hands design, and a theist will jump on that, I'm like, okay, let's explain this to you. Because when they try to avoid words like design or purpose or things like that, I think the atheist makes himself look really bad. I really do. And I think that if atheists started using these terms more and took them back and explained to people how they should be, well, I shouldn't say should be used, but more normatively understood, then they wouldn't be this. They wouldn't be these.
Or
issues.
Don't let them. I think you're right. If they controlled the conversation and didn't let them equivocate on the term, such that they would let them take ownership of the term, in particular of how that term was being used, I agree. But that's not always the fight I want to have at that particular moment.
I understand, and I understand why people do avoid certain words for that very reason. Yeah.
But I'd much rather use it because it's more accurate and it conveys properly. But I had said that at one point when I was talking about the purpose of the universe, and if the universe has a purpose, exactly.
Natural pantheism solves everything. Just ask T. Jump. That's solution to everything.
That's Tom Jump's.
Oh, that is
view, right?
that is. I thought we were going to talk ocean, but no, that's Tom.
That's Tom's epistemological approach to everything. So there's two things I wanted to expand upon on that. One, if what you're saying is the case, then this goes back to what we're talking about. Consciousness somehow is a property of the universe. Because of the way the universe is, that you have the way electrons are, that you have the way atoms work the way they do, the way that stars work the way they do. All these different things about the laws of physics, all of them is an inherent property of the universe that consciousness has to be somehow explained in here. It has to be involved in the universe.
That's been proposed by serious physicists like Wheeler and others who have made that as a
both of them.
Well, I agree that it is, but it depends on how you define consciousness. I mean, I agree that it, in as much as consciousness as I see it and observe it in other people, but as for what I think of it in terms of what I have, it seems to me rather much like free will, in which I believe I have free will. I don't actually believe it, but it seems to me as if I have free will. When I flip a coin, it seems as if it's random. For 99% of the intents and purposes, it is random, but it actually isn't random when I flip a coin, and nor do I actually have free will. So when I talk about consciousness, yeah, I have it in the sense that most of us sort of think about it, but we can't. I think one of the reasons we can't sit down and define it is because it actually is this sort of nebulous thing that we've kind of invented and put these metaphysical properties onto that don't actually exist. But that which is there, yes, it's a property of the universe.
It's stochastic to us. Let me run this by you three, and this is how I kind of relate determinism versus indeterminism for any kind of libertarian free will, which I agree with Nick. I don't think exists. I don't think we're ever fully. We always have some external factors influencing us. We can never get away from that. But the way I would explain it is this, and see if you guys would agree with this. The deterministic view versus the indeterministic view would be something along the lines of, let's say Nick has a certain decision to make at time T. So you look at all the factors that's involved, whether they're external, internal, whatever. But ceteris paribus, you have two time states. One, that he made the decision, and then he goes way further in time. And then you rewind the tape and you go back to that from T, we'll call it T prime to T. So ceteris paribus, all things being equal, he's going to make that same decision every single time exactly the same in a deterministic system. Okay, so given all the exact same conditions, he's always going to make that same decision. Now, the indeterminate person, the libertarian free will, says, no, going back to T from T prime, Nick has just as much opportunity to make a different decision than what he actually made, what we know would be the original decision. I don't think that's the case. I think he's actually going to make the same decision, exactly the same every single time. So I would fall into what's called compatibilism or soft determinism, because I don't think that he would make any different decisions. What do you guys think?
Well, you mind if I go first? Because I'm glad this came up.
Please.
Let me just say a quick side thing here. I'm looking at two different computers, and if the audience if the chat people see that my voice and my picture are not in sync, it's because of the two computers. So I'm aware of it. But anyway, I don't know if that's happening or not. So.
You're popping a little bit. That's funny because your mic is right.
Anyway, just ignore the picture if that good. So this goes back to a conversation that Nick and I were having. I don't remember what, on Twitter or online or whatever, on YouTube or something about everything deterministic, and he uses the example of coins and yeah, that's true. And coins are deterministic, coin flips. In fact, I have a story about this. And I'm going to plug my book, which is coming out in a couple of months. I have a story about when I was a kid. We used to flip baseball cards, and we learned, I don't know how to do it now, of course, but I learned how to flip 50 cards in a row, all coming out heads. And everybody else could do it too. So that's not chance, obviously. What we figured out was exactly how to hold the card, how far to hold it away from the ground, etc. Same thing is true with the coin flip. Same thing is true with chaos. Same thing is true for the butterfly effect. If you knew all the conditions, every single precise condition that existed, everything is predictable. There's one exception to that, and that is the concept of the uncertainty principle, which is critical in physics, in quantum theory. Mm-hmm. The uncertainty principle states that, in fact, it is impossible to know or predict or tell the momentum and the position of an electron at the same time. And this also applies to other particles. So, and that is why we have radioactivity. And that's why the whole idea of the Schrodinger cat, you may remember, the way the Schrodinger cat experiment was devised was there was a radioactive vial in the box where the cat is, which then there's either a radioactive decay or not, and that is completely unpredictable. So the uncertainty principle is a bedrock of modern physics. It's never going to be overturned. It's absolutely true, and it's purely stochastic. So there are certain aspects of the universe that are absolutely random, that are not deterministic, cannot be deterministic. And now the question is, if we're looking at free will, is it, since these are effects on things like electrons, which we know in biology are subject to quantum effects. For example, photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, protons and electrons actually behave as quantum particles. They go through several slots at once, for example. So could it be that there are cases in, for example, in other processes like genetic processes and neurological processes, where we also have these quantum, totally random, non-deterministic events, which actually eventually could lead to true free will?
Yeah,
So it could be
well,
that what we think we have, we really have.
Isn't that the entire basis between for Penrose's orchestrated objective reductionism?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and by the way, I got shat on for that, for even suggesting that was a viable thing. I used to read a lot of Penrose, believe it or not.
Penrose is brilliant.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Penrose, and I used to be Paul Davies, and I mean,
these are all brilliant people.
So I used to read this. But they have actually found microtubules, but Penrose suggested, if I remember the theory correctly,
that's right,
that there was microtubules in the brain that would have quantum fluctuations, and these quantum fluctuations, the emergence would be consciousness from them. But you still have completely random things going on, because like you mentioned with the uncertainty principle, there's actually more than one, believe it or not. For most people may not know that there's other uncertainty principles dealing with energy and time relationships, which is critical in the wave function equations. But the fact that this goes back to that whole indeterminate thing. Like if you rewind time, if you rewind time and all things being equal, which again I suggested cerebus paribus, and I hope I always say that right. I probably always screwed up, but whatever. That could you ever even have all things being equal because of quantum fluctuations?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's the big question. Would the quantum fluctuations be different going back in time? Or is it like a DVD and you're just rewinding it? But that to me seems to lead into fatalism.
Well, I mean, there's a caveat to what I just said, which is that all of this applies on the micro level. And when you have, several trillion electrons in a thing that we actually see at our level of existence, they all cancel out and you get what you'd expect to get. That's why we have quantum physics. That's why we have the laws of classical physics, which are deterministic. Okay, they're not random. Mm-hmm. Because, and this goes into all kinds of weird stuff that, like statistical mechanics. And
I just think it's look, the way I look at it. If we don't have any knowledge of the outcome or anything like that, it's stochastic to us. Even though it's a completely deterministic physical system, we are only caring about information. This goes into like even when you go into like Monty Hall Monty Hall paradox, which is not really a paradox, but the Monty Hall problem. That's only a problem because that people don't understand that information is actually considered to be something that is critical to understanding that problem. So it's that to us, it's completely random when you flip a coin, right? But we all know it's deterministic as far as physics. Right. But when you add in all these quantum things, like you said, there, according to Copenhagen interpretation, there is no information in that entire system to know if there's a quantum fluctuation, when there's a virtual particle, where there's a weak nuclear decay, where there's a spontaneous fission. It does not exist. It's not just unknown to us. There's no what's called local hidden variables in that kind of model. Now, there's other models out there like Bohm and what's called pilot wave theory. But for the most part, the way physics works now is these systems, it's just a non-existent information. So therefore, there could be no possibility of predicting in any way. It is about as truly how could you even get more stochastic than that? It is just because.
No, it is. It's completely stochastic.
Yeah,
that's right.
Which, by the way, fascinating. But whatever.
I would like to suggest, Steve, that somehow or other, everybody on YouTube, Twitter, whatever, gets together and awards you an honorary PhD in everything.
I tell you what,
you know so much stuff.
I would be happy to have an honorary bachelor's degree. I have enough credits for a bachelor's degree. I do have over 120 credits.
No, we go straight to the doctorate.
But if anybody wants to award me like an honorary bachelor's, I'd be thrilled to death. I would be. I don't know why I didn't finish my degree. I do know why. There's personal reasons, but whatever. But I did go to college. But I'm honored that you at least think I'm not an idiot.
Did you guys hear about the fake photoshopped letter supposedly rejecting Einstein's doctorate degree that Anthony
Sparkane did something on that, but I didn't.
Slice Sparkane did something about that.
Yeah.
I was going to say we need to Photoshop that letter, re-Photoshop that letter, and award Steve a PhD with the fake letter that was actually not Einstein.
Well, I did actually want to address a couple of different things, although most of them seem to already have been addressed. The first is the issue of scale. You see, here's the thing, which is I do think it would possibly go to counter my argument that there's no such thing as randomness in the universe, because you could maybe argue that, but you can't necessarily, just because it happens at the quantum level doesn't mean that it's an argument for consciousness or free will or anything like that. In fact, that's what Deepak Chopra does, and Sam Harris destroyed him for that, where Deepak Chopra said, well, we are all infinite possibility, because when you look at the quantum level, you see it's all infinite potentiality until you observe it, and then the wavelength collapses, and then
there are theories out there.
Now you're getting on my nerves, Nick.
There are people out there that
do a bit more of that.
There is something to be said by observation, which we most of us understand as be instrumentation, right? That has perturbations in the system, which is going to cause a change. But there are actual scientific theories that think that there is something to be said for observation. But when you get Deepak Chopra involved in it, you might just put words in a blender and just.
That's not fair. That's not fair.
Yeah.
Well, but my only point is, just because there may be randomness at that level does not in any way that I can tell speak to is there free will or is there consciousness. The other thing is I also would posit that while I understand that currently the thinking is that there are not any hidden variables behind it. You know what? We think that a lot of times, and science is littered with saying, "Well, we don't understand it, and so we're gonna."
Hang on. I'm gonna push back on this one. This one's actually this was as fundamental as Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. If that model is correct, it is absolutely fundamental, and has been proven mathematically. Literally has actually been proven mathematically that there can be no information in that system. Now, that proof is very complicated, obviously, but it has to do with the fact that you look at the states compared to one. If you look at all the states and you kind of work the math, it comes like 9/5, which you have an inequality. I barely remember that. Something about. I know there's inequality. I think it's 9/5. And so when you look at the different ways you can look at the quantum states, it actually shows mathematically, because the inequalities between three states, it cannot be anything that is a local variable. They've eliminated that possibility.
Then I would argue that the likelihood is that it's a different mode, because here's the thing. While I admit that the universe is a phenomenally strange place and that there are probably even stranger things than that, maybe that's the case. The reality is the evidence of everything that we've seen so far and how we understand the universe, it doesn't seem to fit with that. And it may end up being the case, but judging on just sort of how we understand things so far, that does not.
Yeah, it's called the Bell inequality, right? Eric points it out. The Bell inequality actually states, and I remember this off the top of my head, something along the lines is that no hidden variable model can account for all possible quantum states in a system. So correct. There's been no model out there besides pilot wave theory that will actually satisfy the Bell inequality. My God, I do know something about some shit. Wow. By the way, somebody gave me a certificate of recognition a while back. If you guys can see it on the outside thing, I put it up there. I'm a
nice.
By the way, this isn't the uncertainty principle per se, right? Because the reason
it's Bell inequality.
Because the reason you can't know both the position and the direction of momentum. Is because as soon as you measure it, you alter it. You've actually the process.
Well, it's a little more complicated than that.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
What's happening is the wave function allows you a range of where an electron exists. An electron does not exist for all practical purposes. It's going to be really weird, which we're going to have a whole different hangout one day. But electrons are something that are not spatial. They're a point, and so that when you have a specific wave function, the wave function will give you a range of where it can be in relationship to the
probability distribution.
Distribution. So what you're doing is when you collapse a wave function, it appears at a certain point. But if you know the specificity of the point position will give you ambiguity in the momentum, and if you know specificity in the momentum, leaves you ambiguity in the position. And it'll always be
All right.
that inequality there. So delta t or delta x with delta t, I think it is. Well, delta x delta y is always going to be less than h over 2 bar. Is that what it is? Or,
Yes.
So whatever. I'm
Planck's,
going
Planck's constant over
constant.
2, right.
Yeah, over 2.
Right.
So
Planck's constant bar. Anyway,
reduce Planck's constant. Yeah.
but there's another point.
Man, see, we look at all this cool shit we talk about on philosophy stuff, science, now physics.
So, Steve,
Yeah.
what is the most illustrious guest? Who is the most illustrious guest you ever had on Non Sequitur Show?
That's a good
You've said
question.
it many times.
Well, I mean,
A physicist.
Dr. Krauss was.
Yeah.
There you go.
Would definitely say would be the pick,
Lawrence
yeah.
Krauss, who I guess we could say is certainly not a theist, right?
Oh, I think I know where this is going.
He wrote a book called
I know
Universe
that,
for
yeah.
Nothing.
That I read
right?
twice. in
And
order
what
to-
is the
to
bottom
talk to
line
him.
of that book? That quantum fluctuations in a vacuum can create particles spontaneously. That is quantum theory in action. So if you're going to deny, the reality of stochastic processes, then you have to argue with Lawrence Krauss, and I don't think you want to do that.
Yeah. By the way, never mind the fact that I actually read that book a while back. Then I reread it again, so I can actually have a conversation with him that I think that he actually enjoyed, rather than getting the same kind of really basic stuff that he got all the time. I actually had a really good discussion with him.
No, it's great.
on the topic. And by the way, not easy. Okay, and I was thinking to myself the entire time, God, I do not want to look like an idiot in front of Lawrence Krauss. Right? You guys are fine. I can be an idiot. I don't care.
That was
but-
a great show.
Oh yeah, Mercedes Carrere was a good guest, and I really hope, by the way, that she is absolved. People are like saying Mercedes Carrere. She was really articulate, really intelligent, and I really do hope the best for her and that she gets absolved of all this stuff. Because it really pains me the fact that to even think that she could have done something so horrific. But off topic. Anyways, wow, we are like coming up to almost 2 hours now, like 20 minutes out. That went by fast. Wow.
Yeah, that was a good one.
This was fun. I'm just blown away at how we just went from one topic to another so smoothly. Even. I still got any other super chats?
Well, especially with the variety of people that we had on, but it just really there was a confluence of topics there. I think it worked out perfectly.
Two super chats. Sarah Bia, $2. You can't choose free. You can't freely choose to believe in determinism.
Cute. Very
enough.
cute.
Fair enough.
I like it.
Vibrant Brantley, $5. Bye. Take my money. Sorry, I can't stay. Which I already thanked him for. Be around. But anyways, Alex, yeah, Scott Clifton was a great guest too. He wants to come back on too. We have great discussions with him on philosophy. And yeah, we got to get a couple of Egyptologists. We got Dr. Maggie Bryant. Got to get her.
I want to get Clifton on. I want to get Clifton on in time.
Oh yeah.
So,
well, I know he's doing some shooting, right? Because he's in
because he's on 6 different shows.
Yeah, I know, right? 3-time Emmy Award winner, whatever. I don't watch any of his stuff. I just know him from philosophical stuff, and so I told him, I said, I'm sure your show's really good. I just whatever.
He's a general.
He's like, I don't watch your shit either,
and
Steve. So don't worry.
philosophy. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
whatever. All right. I think it's about time we wrap it up because I want to end this on a high note, and this was really, really fun. Again, thank you guys for allowing us to talk about these different subjects. I'm thrilled when I'm able to do so. I'm just at a loss that I have the caliber of people that I have to come in and talk about these things. But Astronomy Live, you got anything coming up? Anything you want to talk about? And by the way, if you want to mention something about the FE Core or something like that, go ahead.
Oh, I don't know the latest on the FE Core thing. I don't have any inside intel on that. I'm working on a couple things separately. I'm working on a program which I'm working on a couple little utilities. One is actually a cool little program I put together that basically takes world coordinate system alignment of pictures of stars that have solar system objects like comets and asteroids in them, and it aligns them based on the orbital elements of that object. So you can align your images on a comet without having to know or visually detect where in the image the comet is. It just does it based on the coordinates. So, and I'm going to be putting that out hopefully later this weekend. So I'm looking forward to that. It's
real quick. Do you think they're going to intercept the visitor, the second visitor we've had from Interstellar?
It would be almost impossible. I think I haven't actually crunched the numbers. It'd be interesting to crunch the numbers on that because I think the excess velocity this thing has, it's so extremely hyperbolic that I doubt we could launch any meaningful probe to it that would actually be able to keep up with its velocity or attain its velocity. We could do a flyby, maybe.
Yeah, I heard they would have had launched the probe like a year ago if they would have actually known about it.
Right, and even that even that might be too late at this point. But
it's extremely hyperbolic. I mean, it's coming in like straight, almost like a 90 degree. But I think it's like, I don't know, 70 something. It's coming in like this and it's going back out, and
right,
back.
exactly.
It's never going to come back. It's hyperbolic, which means it's greater than 1. It's not going to come back and visit us, and it's also not going to form a tail either, really that much, right? Because it's so far away from the sun. It doesn't even go near the sun. It's going more to Mars. Looks like.
Yeah, and so the good news about that is it's not likely to disintegrate because it'll be far enough from the sun that it should stay intact. It won't hopefully won't pull an Elenin or an Ison where it melts by the sun and then we don't.
Can't we get a good comment? I mean, I saw Hellbop, which was just a little blob. But I mean, where's all these great comments did you see from like 1800s when you saw which one was like it took up like how many degrees in the sky? It was like one huge comet.
Comet McNaught was pretty spectacular for southern hemisphere observers. Like we in the northern hemisphere got shortchanged on that one, but yeah. But Hale-Bopp was actually spectacular. Unfortunately,
cool.
Most of us, myself included, really didn't get to see it under truly dark skies. If you really got out away from the city, I think it was even more spectacular. But I saw that. I remember seeing that one in the 90s in telescope binoculars. This interstellar comet, to me, that's really amazing. I mean, it's so rare. All throughout human history, we haven't had any confirmed detections of interstellar objects until a couple years ago when Oumuamua came through, and now suddenly a couple years later we already have a second one on our hit parade, and it's fantastic because throughout the space age, we haven't had that kind of thing detected. Now, of course, we have better survey telescopes these days, much better than what we had even 50 years ago, and so we're able to detect these things at much dimmer magnitudes. In fact, this interstellar comet, I looked for it about 10 days ago, I don't know, a little over a week ago, and with my 8-inch telescope, even using my little utility that I put together to align the images so that the comet should be in the same position on every image and then average the images together to try to take down the noise level, I still can't detect it. It's too dim even for my 8-inch telescope. So, it was an amateur who was using, I think, a 0.6 meter telescope. That's a pretty beefy machine, 3 times the size of my telescope, about a 24-inch wide telescope is what he used to discover this thing. And so even amateurs, of course, have much better equipment than was had by professionals back in the day with our modern CCD cameras and everything. So we're really able to start pick up some of these comets at fairly dim magnitudes. But that's what I actually put this utility together, and I'm hoping in the next few weeks, as this comet gets closer, it'll get a little brighter and hopefully come into the range of my telescope, and then I can do a webcast and we can watch it fly by. Yeah.
24-inch aperture?
24-inch. Yeah, it was about a 0.6 meter roughly. And it might have been I might be a little off on that number. I'm ballparking.
I hate to admit it, but I've never had anything bigger than a 4-inch. So whatever.
Okay. I mean, that was bigger. That was bigger than when I was at university for my undergrad. We had like a 20-something inch telescope, but I think 24. I think that's about the same, if not bigger, than what we had at university.
I would be thrilled to death to have an actual telescope, with the dome, the whole 9 yards. But the problem is I'm nowhere near anywhere that has clear skies or darkness enough. I would have to move to a very rural area outside the state, probably. But that would I've dreamed of something like that at one time because growing up I wanted to be an astrophysicist, believe it or not. Then I realized the math was hard. I was like, no, we're not doing this. But anyways, all right. So, Cy, what do you want to leave us with, my friend?
Thanks for having me on.
By the way, you're amazing, dude. By the way, I just got to say, you are so amazing. You'll always be one of my favorite people of all time. Not just theists, but actual people. So, thank you.
Genuine pleasure to have you on. As much as
you're a good man.
Yeah,
thank you,
absolutely.
Nick. And we can continue this at some point on this whole stochastic issue, if you like. But I think we were able to discuss it to some degree. And I guess the only other thing, since I'm on here, I might as well plug, as I tried to before. I got a book coming out on November 19th. So I'll be tweeting about that in about a week or two. So,
Awesome.
But you didn't ask me to edit for you, I noticed, but okay, fine.
no, my wife did the editing, and she's the best editor I've ever met. So, sorry.
Yeah, well, people do credits and they say all the names and others. We're the others.
Where are the others? Okay, good. I can live with that.
Right. All right, Nick, what do you got for us? And tell us what you're doing with In Time and all that.
Yeah, so co-host of In Time with Ansgar Odinson, and we are.
You guys are killing it.
That is a great show.
Great show.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys very much.
I'm almost show envy.
It's In Time show on YouTube, and we let's see. You can In Time show on YouTube. Myself, Ansgar. I also am owner of the Humanist Codex. You can find me on Twitter at nicksuter.com, author of The Water Thief. I think that just about covers it. So
that's about it. Yeah. You're actually getting some popularity. Your show's growing. I think it's going to grow exponentially. I'm fully supportive of it. So we're going to do one last super chat, which actually leads me into my spiel, because I got just something tomorrow. My Unfinished Journey for $5 for the Rum and Coke Fund just got here. I'll have to catch the whole thing from the beginning. Please do. Please like, share. By the way, I keep telling people, the more you share this link, especially if you go to the share on the video, that is the greatest thing you can do to help me out. Is promote this channel, is to share that link on any social media, whether it be Facebook, be Twitter. That's all tracked. That's how the algorithm for YouTube picks it all up, is if you share that link. So by sharing this link, that makes a huge difference. So I got 100 some odd 200 people watching whenever. If only even 10% of them, help me out, there'd be still a few people. One or two. I mean, it doesn't take a lot for that algorithm to pick it up, but if just a couple people would, 10 to 20, I'm sorry, 10 to 20 people, not higher math. 1% would be one or two. So tomorrow I'm doing the Unfinished Journey, from Unfinished Journey on the, you mentioned Rum and Coke night. I'm going to be doing Rum and Coke tomorrow. I think Cheshire is going to be able to join us. Unfortunately, her sister cannot, so all you people that were just falling in love with her the other night, suck it. Rachel is going to be busy. And yes, by the way, I have known Rachel for quite some time. I've always had a little secret crush on her. No big deal. She knows this. She knows it. She's funny as hell, and she wants to learn philosophy. So we might bring her on for Ask a Philosopher, even though she knows nothing about this stuff. She likes philosophy. And you know what? If we could help her learn about philosophy a little bit, I think that's great, right? And plus, I'm going to use her because she's easy on the eyes, and she knows that. But she's really sweet, and like I said, I'm glad you guys got to meet her sister. Cheshire's one of the best, and I think that she'll be done with her move and be able to join us for tomorrow for Rum and Coke night. Now, I was going to do Katie Polson's Without a Crystal Ball's video tomorrow, because, as you guys know, she put it up, and then she deleted it off her channel. I put it up on the Great Debate community. She flagged it, and I got a strike, which I was not unexpected.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, yeah. By the way, I was really I expected her to do so. It wasn't a big surprise. But I wanted to know if her apology was sincere or not, right? Because I made a promise to her that I wasn't going to put her on my radar because she did what I asked her to do, apologize. At least half-heartedly, and only on one of the things that she should have apologized for. But it was enough. It was the main one that I wanted to apologize for. But since she flagged my channel and I got a strike, by the way, I could still stream because it was the first one I've ever had on that channel as a warning. But the fact that she wanted to shut down my channel by striking it, which, by the way, she had every right to do. I'm not saying that she did anything, unethical. It was completely unfair use. This was not fair use by me. I recognize this. But I wanted to see where her ethical standards lie. That she made an apology to me. That was directed to me. I was going to put it on my channel because it was directed to me. And then she strikes the channel. She is not ethical. She didn't mean anything that she said, and I can't take a word or anything. But now she's back on my radar, and I have no remorse about it. None whatsoever, because I think she does a lot of duplicitous things. So I have to decide tomorrow whether I'm going to do that or save it for Monday with Cheshire for Caffeine Corner. I've already said I was going to do it for tomorrow. I have to know what you guys really want. And by the way, I'm not saying that I'm going to actually listen to you on this. I just want your input. But should I hold to what I said? Because I had all these people expecting it for tomorrow night and do it on Rum and Coke night. Have people come in and we'll just watch the video and drink. and point out all the bullshit in it? Or should we save that for Cheshire and Iron Caffeine Corner? You guys decide. Let me know in the comment section. And I want to thank Astronomy Live, Dr. Gart, and my partner Nick here, who, again, one of my favorite philosophers of all time, even though he's into this Ayn Rand objectivism stuff. But whatever.
Whoa!
No, he's anti it. He's anti it. So
I'm against it.
Yeah.
That's what the book was about. Was
no, I know,
it down,
but I don't
dude.
understand that shit. I don't get objectivism, but yeah, I know that you are actually against the objectivism. I had a long discussion with somebody on the objectivism the other day. It was actually pretty fascinating because they were pretty much parroting what you said. They must have read your book. I don't know. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching this. This was fun. This was one of my more favorite episodes of Ask a Philosopher because we got to get into not just philosophy, but other topics I like biology and physics. But with that, guys, good night.